Namaste, everyone. A very
Namaste.
warm welcome to today's session. The title of today's session is Science Education in Schools as It Should Be? Our guest speaker is Ms. Bhuvana Nandakumar.
By the way, in my classroom, in the Nandakumar classroom in here in Minnesota, textbooks are used for ramps. Textbooks are not used for studying. Textbooks are used to prop things up, to increase the height. So if it is a rural classroom, you can still experience it. Not two toy cars. You may not have two toy cars. Use two rocks, a smaller pebble and a larger rock. There are ways in which you can incorporate nature and what is around you into the science classroom specifically. But one of the biggest recognitions I had was that when a student here has to write an examination, they actually give you the basics so you don't have to memorize them. So they will give you the basic formula sheet. It is a part of the exam. Then all you have to do is use that knowledge in order to derive and answer questions that may be there. I had a student at the end of last year who said, "Help, help." And I said, "What happened?" And he walked into the class saying, "Help, help." And he said, "Everything I think about in terms of physics. It is so hard, Miss Nandakumar. Everything is like I have to say, I'm seeing physics everywhere now." And to me, that is success as a physics teacher, if I'm able to do that, even in one student.
Ms. Bhuvana began her teaching career at Mirambika, the free progress school of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Delhi. While at Mirambika, the seeds of focusing on the 5 aspects of integral education were planted in her pedagogy. This knowledge grew with practice at the Mothers International School, a more traditional setting where the incorporation of integral education within a traditional curriculum was encouraged. Bhuvana believes in the transformative power of a holistic education as she nurtures learners within and outside the classroom. Her journey in teaching has spanned 3 continents and thousands of students. She currently teaches college level physics courses at an innovative public high school in Minnesota. Today's session will be in the conversation format. Dr. Ramesh Bijlani will be moderating the conversation with Ms. Bhuvana. Dr. Bijlani is a prolific writer and an inspirational speaker. Once a professor at AIMS New Delhi, Dr. Bijlani is now a spiritual seeker at Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Bhuvna ma'am, it's lovely having you with us on the Yes platform. Thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to a really interesting session with you, ma'am. Over to you and Dr. Bijlani, sir, please.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhuvana, for being there. You are a very rare person. You have extensive experience in teaching science in both the countries, India and in the US, and you are a devotee. And in fact, your lineage of devotion to Sri Aurobindo and the mother goes back to your grandfather. So your grandfather, your mother, and you all been into this. So integral education and Sri Aurobindo and the mother's teachings are in your blood. So with that type of a combination, which is so rare, I think what you speak about the scene of education, particularly science education in both India and the US, would be very useful to for to those who are interested in education, which means essentially everybody, because education in schools impacts the whole society as a whole. But particularly the parents, school teachers, and school and college students who are now at an age which they can when they can look at their own education more critically, so it should be useful for everybody. So welcome again, and uh, to start with, let me say that there's no country in the world which is completely satisfied with the type of school education or education in general that they have. But then just to find fault and feel superior is not what the whole business is about. We have to sort of be healthy critics and look at the situation, how it can be improved, what is it that can be fixed, what is it that is maybe ideal, but is not feasible. So we have to be sort of pragmatic as well as try to do the best possible. When it comes to science education, uh, one aim, of course, is to uh, foster the curiosity and the thinking abilities of the student in such a way that those who have that type of an opening and inclination and temperament and unique gifts, when they are a little grown up, they should be able to contribute to generation of new knowledge. So that's
Mhm.
how the scientific knowledge accumulates through research, and they should their abilities for good quality research should be encouraged and fostered. But then,
Mhm.
while such people will be in any society relatively few, the rest also should imbibe some of the basic characteristics of the scientific temper, so that they can learn to think clearly, critically, logically. And critical thinking is particularly important these days because we are flooded with advertisements which tend to misguide us. So one should be able to see through them and make the right choices and not just fall in for these advertisements behind which there's a lot of power, money power, which means the power of psychologists and advertising specialists who have been hired to create those ads. So they are very effective in creating an illusion, and to be able to see through it, one has to be a critical thinker. So these are some of the things which one to expect from science education anywhere in schools. And with that, let me ask you, to what extent these two basic things, that is nurturing the curiosity of the child and fostering the ability to think clearly, logically, and critically, to what extent these are being actually fostered through science education?
Thank you, Dr. Bijlani. You're starting off with a very difficult question, meaning in the sense that it doesn't have a simple answer. But I will try my best. You used the right word. You said fostering, because both curiosity and critical thinking are not things that can be taught. As as is most of teaching, most of learning, I should say, not teaching. So the there has to be a greater importance placed to creating an environment in the classroom or in the learning space where these things can be fostered, where these two ideas, the idea of curiosity and critical thinking, can be fostered. And I think I very firmly believe actually that the first step towards that is creating an environment where questioning is allowed. That learning is not a part of a didactic process, but more of an absorptive process. So, children, students are exposed to experiences that allow them, experiences in an environment that allow them to question why, the what, the when, the where, the how. And then along with that, uh, you know uh, foster, like, support that, for the teachers to support that, for the educators to support that kind of a thinking. So the environment, the substratum has to be conducive to the learning environment. So that is the very first thing. um, Now, is that happening? If that is your question, I think that is the ideal world. But I am not sure that um, that is something that can be imposed upon. Uh, a lot of that has to do with the teacher themselves. Um, and so, does the teacher have the flexibility to allow for that curiosity, to allow for that critical thinking to happen? Or is the teacher having to teach to a test, to teach to an exam, teach to certain, I agree that there should be standards, but teach to exactly those standards without allowing that organic learning to take place? So a lot, I would say that the short answer to that is creating the substratum.
Bhuvana, in fact, by talking to some of the students, I found that not only in general, there will be exceptional teachers, but in general, curiosity is, in fact, not only not being encouraged, it's being killed. In the sense that the teachers sometimes don't encourage questions, get angry when you ask a question, particular question which relates to understanding what has been explained, that if you can't understand by this much explanation, then probably you'll never understand. So, the child develops a sort of feeling that probably science is beyond me. And so, and one evidence of it is that if you uh, encourage the children to ask any questions when they are in primary school, so many hands go up. But when it comes to secondary school, hardly anybody raises the hand. So somewhere this curiosity has disappeared while moving from primary school to high school.
I agree with you about the raising hands. As a teacher myself, I can attest to that. And as Arunima very kindly introduced me, I have seen that on all the three continents that I've taught in. That the number of hands that raise does indeed come down as the years as the students get older. I think a part of that, yes, I agree, has to do with curiosity being killed somewhere down the line, along the line, suppressed, I would say. Some of it is probably attitudes of the students, but which is not something that is under our control. But the curiosity part certainly is. And I think, um, personally, as a teacher, the reason for that is that as the students are younger, and all those children raise their hands, or students raise their hands, a teacher is more or less able to satisfy their curiosity. But as the students get older, the teacher is not always able to satisfy that curiosity. And the response to that is twofold. One is to say, well, I taught it this way, the way you just said it, Dr. Bijlani. I taught it, and if you could not understand it, you're probably not capable of understanding it, which is obviously patently incorrect, because as a good educator, one should be able to use analogies and explain things and satisfy curiosity using different languages. And I don't mean linguistically, but different language. Show, tell, demonstrate, act, experience. There are so many ways in which it can be done. And the second part is humility. As the students grow older, they do realize that there's more that they don't know and they want to ask about. But the teacher also ought to recognize that there is more that they don't know. And to have that humility to say, I will try to answer your question, but if I cannot answer, I will find the answer for you so that your curiosity is satisfied. I think that is the key that educators could have. I see a raised hand. I don't know what the format is going to be. Are you going to collect the questions or?
I think we can take up the questions at the end.
Sure. Okay.
Now, apart from encouraging the child to ask questions, and if the children don't ask, the teacher asking questions or provoking thought while teaching, uh, there's another thing I think which is important, that the student should also learn how to formulate the question properly. So that also is something which the teacher has to sort of keep on at the back of her mind, that because in research we know that just having a question is not enough. Formulating it properly is also important.
That is true. But formulating only comes from experience, and experience only comes from asking more questions.
Hmm.
And so creating that environment where questioning is perfectly fine. I have to tell you that that is not the norm anywhere. That you keep asking questions and people have the patience to answer you. Many a time, I personally am in situations where I have to apologize. Like, say, I'm in a doctor's office and having, I don't know, an MRI or an X ray or something. happening. And in order to make conversation, I ask questions. I say, okay, why do you do this? Or why do you do that? Or how does that work? And invariably, I have to apologize and say, defend myself and say, I'm sorry I'm asking all these questions. It's because I'm a science teacher. As though only as a science teacher, I have the license to ask questions. Either because of the science part or the teacher part, and that nobody else has a right to ask questions. And we should just, go stand in front of the X-ray machine, take our X-ray, and go home. So I think getting into that habit of asking questions, but as adults, we being okay with it and having that humility to say, oh, this person is asking a lot of questions. I only know the answer to some of them. Let me find out the answer to others.
Well, in the doctor's office, it may sometimes be that the doctor is extremely busy. There are too many patients waiting, and therefore may not want to encourage questions. But in the classroom also, sometimes there can be a conflict between encouraging questions and going slow, and on the other hand, what is called in India covering the syllabus. Does that happen in the US too?
It does. It does. And because I teach a college level course at the high school level, and I teach the youngest high schoolers a college level course, and it's in physics, which is a pretty, if there are scientists here, you will agree that physics is the one that flummoxes the mind the most. So yes, and because it's college level, there's a syllabus I have to cover. But there are ways around it. I actually encourage the students and say, stop and ask me questions. I would rather you stop class and you just ask questions. I had a class last year, at the end of last year, where I had a student secretly tallying the number of questions that were asked by each student. And one student asked me 41 questions in 50 minutes. This was amongst other students that were also asking me questions. So, yes, that as an educator, there is that need to keep that balance, but also to recognize that there are some things, there's some aspects of curiosity that can only be satisfied by a human because there are many layers to the topic. And there are some questions that the students can find out on their own, can research on their own, to give them that ability, to give them that tool to be able to find answers for themselves, I think is also a very important part of the learning process, to give them that tool. And
Sure, I mean,
then
they should.
and then as the students grow older, to help them discern between the two. What are the questions where there are layers? And what are the questions that, I can Google and find the answer to?
Sure, I mean, now it has become so simple to go to Google. But in
Right.
general, sort of, as we say in education, that we should not only make them learn, but also make them learn how to learn.
Correct.
Now, you talked of physics particularly. That takes me to the emphasis on definitions. And let me share my experience in class 9 when we had just started studying physics as a separate subject. And one of the first classes, the teacher turned to the board. That's how he started. It gave us no exciting introduction or inspiring introduction to what an exciting subject physics is. He turned to the board and wrote down the definition of force. And then he started asking the students one by one, three, four students, what is force? They read out from the board, which he did not mind. And after three or four students had read it out, he assumed that everybody understood what force is. Now, there was something in that. The force is a push or a pull, which produces motion or tends to produce motion, stops motion or tends to stop motion. I could understand much of it, but what is this tends to? That's something I didn't understand because I didn't know the word. And my English was at least average, if not so, and many probably might not have understood, but nobody asked any question. We were afraid to ask questions. And then I came and looked up the dictionary, and that's how I understood what is this tends to produce motion or stop motion. Now, I don't know how many went home and actually consulted the dictionary. I've always admired definitions for the precision and how much they can pack in a few words, leave nothing out, and yet be very concise and precise. I've admired them. But at the same time, unless one understands what the definition is conveying, it becomes rote memory. If you understand it, then you can come up with a definition which may not be in exactly the same words, but will be more or less equally concise and precise. That's the way I would look at definitions. Whereas what I found in general was in the class was that students were trying to mug up definitions because they would be asked in the exam. And the result of that is sometimes that if you reverse the question, in the sense that you ask something based on the definition, say you ask them, what is it? I mean, this is a very crude example, but sort of, what is it that produces motion? Then, they don't say that it is force that produces motion. So if you reverse the way, reverse the whole thing, they can't do it because they mucked up the definition. So I don't know
Right.
to what extent this type of definitions are actually emphasized even now, particularly in the US.
Um, as far as this goes, I can speak for the US. It's been a while since I taught in India, so I can't say to what it is like there. But from what I hear, the rote and the definition is still very much a part of it there. Out here, we don't even think or teach about definitions. It is about the experience. Because you use the example of force, which I was not expecting, I will also use the example of force and try to, give you an idea of how we kind of introduce the concept of force in the class here. So what we do is we have a ramp, like a wooden ramp on one side with a pulley at the end. It's called an Atwood machine, essentially a ramp with a pulley. And we have a car, a little toy car on the side, hooked to a string over the pulley. And we have some weights hanging on the side. I start off by leaving everything on the floor. And this is actually literally the first class of the year. So the students walk into the class and they see a ramp and a car and a string and some weights. And I tell them to prop the ramp against some textbooks. By the way, in my classroom, in the Nandakumar classroom in here in Minnesota, textbooks are used for ramps. Textbooks are not used for studying. Textbooks are used to prop things up, to increase the height. So they place the ramp. And then I say, first try and balance in such a way that the cart is on little toy cart is on the ramp and the weights are hanging freely. See if you can make them balance equally so that the cart doesn't move. Then see if you can slowly increase the weight and watch what happens. Well, the cart is going to move up the ramp. What happens if you add a lot more weight? What does it do to the cart? Does it make it go faster or does it speed up? Make the speed increase faster. So which is essentially acceleration, which is the result of force. So, and then take away the weights and see what happens to the cart as it goes down the ramp, as you increase the number of weights you take. So I have them experience it. And as they're experiencing it, they're at a table and they're talking to each other. At no point do I say use the word force. At no point do I use the word acceleration, speed, nothing. I just tell them play with the toys for about half an hour. And then for 20 minutes, towards the end of the class, for the second half of the class, we talk about it. And the advantage of doing it this way is we talk, and then obviously somebody says force because they're very excited to be in a physics classroom. They want to use physics words. Somebody says force, then somebody says the speed increases. And then I have to tell them the speed does not increase. The rate at which the speed increases as you increase the weights, which is acceleration increases. So that is how I introduce the concept of force. There is at no point am I saying, is it pulling or tending to pull, pushing or tending to push. But the tending to happens when you start increasing the weights slowly. So without using the words, they're experiencing it. And then when we go on to explain, say, frictional force, a lot of them are drivers or they're learning to drive. So then I talk about friction, then it snows. So then I talk about friction in the snow. So there's a lot of very practical examples that I try to bring in, which makes it a lot easier, I think, for the students to understand the concept. So definitions really don't play a role.
See, I mean, you just talked about friction. So on the ramp, if we could put some sandpaper, that
We
would give the
do.
experience of increased
We
friction.
do. We do. That's the next step. But this was the first class of the year. So
And when you talk to acceleration, they see acceleration in action. Then you don't have to tell them why you
correct,
use the unit of time twice. Why is it
correct.
meters per second per second? Why
Per
per
second.
second twice? You don't have to explain that.
Yeah, that's right. And these are not technologically advanced toys. This is just a toy car and some washers as weights and a string. So nothing really technologically sophisticated, which I know
Nothing
even the mother
exotic.
school classroom had. So
Anybody can assemble that.
exactly.
It doesn't cost money. Just have to needs an idea and the uh, will to sort of do it. Take some time
Right,
and effort. That's all.
right.
This experiential learning is so really uh,
It is
useful.
incredibly important, yes.
Of course, I mean, in no class, science class, one can learn everything in an experiential manner. Experiences can be also of many types. It may be a demonstration like the type you told, an experiment, or it be just an observation in nature. But even all that may not be able to do everything that the student is expected to learn. So the next best is probably at least to understand what the student is studying at a
Correct,
mental
correct,
level, form a mental picture of it.
correct.
Yeah.
It reminds me of my experience. I went back to mother school, and one of my dear colleagues who taught when I was there too was teaching the concept of momentum when I was there. After she taught, she was like, "Would you like to say something?" I was just, sitting in her class watching. And then I just went to the front of the class and I said, "How many of you have younger siblings?" And some of them raised their hands. And then I said, "How many of you have toy cars at home?" And then a few more raised their hands. And then I said, "Well, why don't you go home and play with the toy cars and see how they crash into each other?" Because that is what momentum is about. If you have a big car and a small car, how do they crash into each other? Which one moves more? I mean, look at all that. You don't have to, watch movies or YouTube videos to learn. You can experience it. If it is a rural classroom, you can still experience it. Not two toy cars. You may not have two toy cars. Use two rocks, two stones, a smaller pebble and a larger rock. There are ways in which you can incorporate nature and what is around you into the science classroom specifically.
Next, I think let's turn to something which probably to use to some extent everywhere in schools. I've heard the word students use the word memorize even in the US, but then that is the lowest faculty of learning. And while it is required to some extent in life, uh, the emphasis that is there on memory and what is learnt through memory, how much credit it gets in the exams, all that is at a price. Because while developing this capacity for rote memory, we are actually killing the higher faculties of learning, like curiosity and original
Mhm,
thinking, creative thinking, critical thinking, perhaps to some extent even clear thinking.
mhm, mhm.
We are killing those. So, would you like to say something about it, particularly sort of in view of your experience in both the countries, uh, how the emphasis on memory, if at all it is there, differs in the two countries, how much emphasis it has, how much credit a student gets for using memory and developing memory?
I think there's a place for memorization. I don't want to like completely dismiss it. There is a place for memorization. There are some things that you are recalling. There is a lot of importance for recall in learning. There is no doubt about that. But memorizing concepts or even patterns, I don't think is conducive to learning. Understanding is what is conducive to learning. And I think in real life, as adults, also we see that. You can't really memorize how to drive a car or even to drive a bicycle. You ride a bicycle. You can't really memorize that. What you do is practice, and what you do is understand that if you bend to the right or if you pedal harder with your right leg, then you don't have to probably pedal as hard with your left leg as you're going down. Like, or if you're going up a hill, the way you pedal is different. That kind of a thing comes from experience. You don't memorize, oh, when I'm going up a hill I have to go half pedal, or when I'm going down a hill I have to be careful and, like, lay lightly on the brakes or anything like that. You don't, I mean, those are not memorization. Those are things that come because of practice. And so while I do think that a certain amount of memorization is important, I don't think memorization has a role in physics, or in science, I should say. I shouldn't say just physics. In science in general, there might be the need to say, for example, in biology, kind of remember what comes first. Is it the kingdom or the phylum or the genus, or just, that kind of a thing. But to actually rote memorize everything does not help. I also taught in Europe to a very mixed class of international students. And part of my responsibility there was teaching math. And it was quite interesting there for me to see how students came from different cultures, from about 30, 40 different countries, came from countries that had more rote memorization as a very important part of their culture, and some that didn't, and how that functioned in the classroom. And I think, like, for example, in math there might be some value to memorizing what 3 times 7 is, so that unlike a student in an American classroom, you don't have to punch the calculator every single time you want to know what 3 times 7 is, as a very simple example. But I think what is more important is to have students see patterns. Science is all about patterns. And to educate children that that is what is important. But that will only come if society values it. And if assessments value that understanding. That what you need to see is patterns. If you take the example of force, what you need to see is that the more force you put on one side, the more the car is going to accelerate. Not that you memorize the definition of force. That is not going to save a life. But if you know how to pedal a bicycle, or if you know that more force does something that less force doesn't, then, it's probably more useful for you. So society needs to get there first, and to say that rote memorization in science is not the way to go.
That raised a few thoughts in my mind as you were speaking. Uh, till class 8, we had to study all the subjects, a little bit of everything, including history and geography. And these were two subjects that I didn't like because there was so much to be remembered. Of course, I have come to love history, if not so much of geography, but history I've come to love later on. But then I realized that why I didn't love it in school, and what could be a different way of learning history, which can be very interesting. But anyway, that apart, I didn't like these two subjects because there was a lot of remembering to be done. And I thought in class 9, I'll study science and I'll know history and geography, and that'll be nice. But then the first time the teacher came to teach chemistry, once again, he turned to the board and wrote down sodium Na, potassium K, hydrogen H, and so on, and filled the board with a number of commonly used symbols and formulae. And he said, when you come for the next class, you should have remembered all this.
Oh.
Now, that was his introduction to chemistry. Now, I thought this is worse than history and geography. I thought science will be exciting. Science will be
Right.
about thinking. Science will be about
Right.
making discoveries and asking questions. This is worse than history and geography. And
That's
the result was,
unfortunate.
in fact, I failed the first three class tests in class 9. And but then I knew that I had to apply some correction. And what I did was I went to the school library and took out a few books on physics and chemistry, started borrowing them one by one. And what I did with those books were written by authors from the UK and the US. What I started doing was I started reading in those books just the preface and the introduction.
Hmm.
Just the, and then I was sure, I knew that these people don't know how to teach science. I'll have to study it my way. I studied it my way, and the result was that the grades started picking up. And by the time we were in class 10 and 11, I was once again at the top. And why that happened was because when there was very little to be learned, the students who were memorizing could memorize everything that they had to know. As we went to the higher classes, the content increased, and my approach, which was based on understanding, paid
Hmm.
off. But then
Mhm.
at the same time, what I now feel is that, but in the end, through a different type of approach, which was a little more enjoyable, I still ended up giving the system what the system demanded.
Hmm.
And the result was that probably I was not very well trained for generation of new knowledge.
Hmm.
And probably that is what is happening to a lot of us in this country. And that's why if you
Hmm.
look at the contribution of really genuine path-breaking research, real
Hmm.
valuable contributions to new knowledge that India has made in the last 300 to 400 years that modern science has grown, and even in the last 75 years since we have been independent,
Hmm.
compared to our population, our contribution has been dismal.
Hmm.
And I think it's the school's education is responsible for it. And we can't correct it by having big scientific institutes and allowing the scientists to import any equipment from anywhere in the world. That is not what going to do it. The seeds have to be laid in the schools. That's one thing that. Uh, Second thing, that occurred to me was while you were talking that uh, yes, the memory is required, but that should be for some very basic things, axiomatic things, which are so obvious, which are more or less common sense. Something like, we don't have to remember our name. We are using it so commonly. And it's the same way there are some basic facts which we are using so commonly and experiencing so commonly, we don't have to remember them. But then
Hmm.
using these basic facts and processing them through logic, we can derive a lot more facts.
Hmm.
We can start with some basic formulae in physics and chemistry, and through
Hmm.
that, using logic, we can derive a lot more. So what
Hmm.
we can derive quickly, we don't have to remember.
That is correct.
So that is another approach which probably is not emphasized enough. The emphasis on remembering everything rather than just some basic things which really don't need much effort to remember. Uh, eh, Maybe you'd like to respond at this point. Then I'll go to the expectations of the society and the assessment system.
Sure. I want to actually catch on the last point that you said, which was that there are certain basic things that you probably need to memorize. And I remember that is a way I tried to teach when I was in India, where you remember the basic things and then see the patterns and derive the more complex things. It is so much harder because of the examinations that the students had to write at the end. Um, as I teach here, my learning curve as I started teaching here has been pretty high. But one of the biggest recognitions I had was that when a student here has to write an examination, they actually give you the basics so you don't have to memorize them. So they will give you the basic formula sheet. It is a part of the exam. And then all you have to do is use that knowledge in order to derive and answer questions that may be there. So I think that is a really I'm seeing Dr. Bijlani
Yes, I'm
is
here.
he, oh, you're here. Okay. For a second, I thought you were frozen. So anyway, so I think that for me was huge. I did not realize that that was even a possibility because in India, the expectation is that you memorize everything, every single thing that is basic. Here they basically say, here are the basic set of formulae. Use them. These are your physics facts. Use them in the exam. They are a part of the answer booklet. And the same goes for chemistry, the same goes for biology. They have these facts. Use them, and then using those, build on them and show us what you know.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I think that you are very right about that.
And actually, assessment systems are so important because in the final analysis, what drives the learning styles of the students is the assessment system.
Correct.
What is it that will reward in the exam? That happens all over the world, and therefore assessment is in fact an extremely important part. And one of the leaders in medical education has put it very well. It applies to education in general, that assessment is the tail that wags the dog of education.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. So
Assessment is
then,
the tail that wags the dog of education.
yes.
So that's it. Now coming to
And
the society.
assessment is crucial. I mean, we cannot, as a society, move forward if we do not have proper assessment. So I'm not saying assessments should go away. Assessments, I think, are crucial. But how you assess, is I think where it all is. And really, I cannot think in the last, decades that I've been teaching here, I cannot think of a time that I had to ask a student, what is the definition of force? Define something. You don't need to know it. It's in that basic sheet right there, that force equals mass times acceleration. You don't need to remember that. Let's see if you can derive the force in a circle based on that. So let's get there. Let's get to that higher knowledge.
The expectations of the society. I think that's again very important because what you find the dominant pattern is that the society, the parents of the children, and this principal and the management and the requirements of the boards of education, they all unite in having just one single goal: the student should get the highest possible marks. The emphasis on scores, and the examinations are so designed that it is possible for students to, if they have remembered everything expected, they can get 100% marks. And the victim of this approach is the student, who is burdened, who doesn't find learning fun, finds it's a burden to be carried for the sake of passing exams and coming up to the expectations of the parents and the teachers and the society. And in the process, we not only lose many potential scientists who might generate new knowledge, or at least generate the best quality new knowledge, we also end up killing the love for learning itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I think which we again have to consider. And I don't know why that is so. Maybe it is because we sort of don't leave the choice of the career to the same extent as it is in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this situation in the society is different if the student is encouraged to just follow his or her own inclinations and abilities, and in choosing the career, then it may be more difficult to make a living in India. That's also possible. But all the same, the fact is that the expectations in terms of career choice are quite different and are by and large being defined by outside factors. That is not by the student who has to build up the career, but by the parents and the teachers and the society and the boards of exams and the society. They're all together sort of uniting to push the student in a particular direction when it comes to the career choice.
Right. I agree. And it is obviously an issue, and it's not just an issue there. It is also an issue in the society here, where it is seemingly true that you have a choice and an option of what you would like to pursue. And it is true, there is that freedom to choose. However, society does guide what you choose here too. So I don't want to negate that. But having said that, I think the issue here is more the assessment or predicate, or not predicated, but judging success based on marks, rather than judging success based on standards, which is, I think, a very different thing and a different kind of a philosophy. Um, where rather than saying, "Oh, you got 100 out of 100, you are better than a person, or you have more knowledge, or you have learned more than a person that has a 98 out of 100," is a different way of looking at things than to say, these are the standards that you need to have. You need to have passed, or you need to have a knowledge of. When you pass fifth standard, and then these are the science standards that you need to have when you have passed sixth standard. When you have that kind of a standards based education, I think it leaves a little more room for flexibility. And I also think that um, it can help students have not just more choice in what they do, but also uh, find out what is it that really moves them. What is their passion? What is it that they want to do as adults? Or what is it that they don't want to do as adults? And I think standards based education can move us in that way. Marks based education tends to um, keep us in that rut of, oh, I need to maximize the points in order to get the best opportunities available.
So essentially, it's sort of criterion-based assessment, and the criteria are more enlightened.
Correct.
You're not
The criteria
expecting
are more
facts.
enlightened. They are more also appropriate for a universal set of students, so that students in a big city are not benefited over students in a rural area. So when you have to say Pythagorean theorem has to be taught, or forces has to be taught, you're leaving that flexibility on how that topic is taught, so long as that standard is taught and achieved by all students. So it's a way to bring society forward when you do that.
Actually, when you talked about the freedom to teach and the freedom to the way the student wants to learn, I think that freedom is something which is again the casualty. And in some ways, instead of going forwards, India seems to have gone backwards. Uh, when I was a student, whether it was science or whether it was English, if you understood something, you could write in your own words. And when it came to languages, you could use your creativity. And if your language was more effective, more impressive, and more euphonic, uh, had sort of that touch, then you scored more. These days, it has become possible to get 100% even in languages. And that is to some extent at the expense of the ability to really write a paragraph properly,
Ah,
or to write an essay in which, uh, the way Sri Aurobindo has described the essence of writing, that each sentence should be connected to the preceding sentence, and you should know where to break the paragraph and
mhm,
move on to the next movement, which
mhm,
in turn follows from the what was there in the previous one, so that there's a continuity of thought. Now, that's something which is disappearing
mhm,
because of this way of examining in languages where it's possible to get 100% marks, making it as
mhm,
objective as possible. And the same applies also to the way the teacher can teach,
mhm,
because she is expected to teach a certain amount in a certain way in every class. And there's an academic supervising supervisor in the school supervising the class, and
mhm,
making sure that the teacher falls in line, toes the line.
mhm,
And that is something which is, I think, taken away the freedom of the teacher also to be more
mhm,
innovative and decide to what extent she will actually hand over the facts, how she will
mhm,
hand them over, to what extent she'll leave the students to learn on their own,
mhm,
and instead encourage the general faculties of learning, developing the love to learn, uh, the capacity to think. Now, those are things which, or for that matter, in integral education, the psychic element. To what extent she can bring in the element of psychic education, irrespective of what subject she is teaching, including science. Because you can bring in psychic education in science so easily because of the standards of ethics and morality that are expected in research and
For
preparing
sure.
your preparing reports for your research publication. I mean, there's so much of uh, that comes in science. So, to what extent the teacher is going into that, and to what extent she's showing that how much of scientific discoveries have been the result of, in fact, some apparent accidents which were because of an intuitive ability and a prepared mind. That's how a lot of path-breaking facts were discovered.
Discoveries
Now, those
happen.
are the type of things which the teacher can't bring out if she has to finish a certain amount of material in a class and teach it in a particular way.
Right. I think the finish a certain amount of material in a class is manageable. It is the teaching in a particular way, I think, that can handicap teachers and constrain them in a way that prevents them from, getting to the goals that they themselves would like to get. Every teacher is very unique, and I think can bring. Every educator is unique and can bring their strengths to the table, to the classroom, and they should be allowed to do that. And I think that is one thing that I'm very grateful for here is that I'm allowed that freedom. So yes, I do have to teach a specific course. I have to teach to certain standards. These are the things that the students need to know by the end of the year. Yes. But how I teach them is something that I don't have somebody breathing down my neck for the most part. There are some constraints, but really, for the most part, budget, for example, is a constraint. But I'm allowed to, teach teach every topic the way that I want. So much so that at the end of the semester, I actually my exam is, and I might be giving this out if one of my students ends up watching this video. Hopefully, they won't. But essentially, is to create a question in mechanics that hits these certain learning targets, and then give a clear solution for it. You create your own question. The world is your playground. I have things from but it has to be mechanics, obviously. So I had a student talk about being a director in a movie set, and they had to kick a ball from the top of a building, and it had to reach the bottom with a certain velocity, like, just incorporating things that they could. There was another student who talked about traveling to Mars. It didn't matter what you did. It just had to have that, it had to hit those standards. And then they provide their own solution. And that is the final exam. You create your own question, you provide your own elegant solution to it, and you are done.
Yes, students can create wonderful questions if they are given
Yes.
an opportunity.
Yes. Given an opportunity to do so.
Yes,
And so
yes.
that is another way I try to inculcate that spirit of questioning. Just keep asking questions.
Well, I mean, that much creativity probably I didn't experience in my teachers in school, but at least that freedom was available.
Yes.
Uh, the result of the approach now is that the teachers have to work much harder. They spend much more time in school, and they have to have a lot of on about what their documentation has increased. But the net result is that, in fact, that freedom of the teacher has gone away. And one of the results of this has been that the best of minds are not turning to school teaching anymore.
That is true.
If I have 100 B.Ed or B.L.Ed students in front of me, they keep coming to the ashram here uh, for sessions on integral education. And one of the questions I invariably ask them is that when you were in class 11 or 12, how many of you wanted to be school teachers? And out of a group of 50, hardly 2 or 3 hands go up, which means the rest joined because they could not get something that was better. And then, of course, we bring out in that you should see that sometimes failure also has the seeds of the best for you. And
Right.
what are the opportunities which teaching provides which other professions don't? How you
Right.
can fulfill the purpose of life much more effectively through teaching than through many other more wanted professions, like, say, being a manager in a
Right,
company.
right,
uh,
right.
manage.
What brings you
So,
joy?
So what gives you joy? What gives you a sense of fulfillment? What gives you an inbuilt opportunity to fulfill the purpose of life by giving what you have to those who need it? That is essentially what expression of love is about. So you
That is
have
very
a new set of students coming to you year after year, and what they basically need is love and knowledge, and you have these are the two things you give them.
that is true.
And so that way you are getting that opportunity inbuilt into something through which you are incidentally also making a living.
That is true.
What better combination can you have? So so you inspire them, and to some extent it does work, at least some of them, and they appreciate it. But all the same, if we had the top students, even within a system which is not a perfect system, but within that the toppers were to could change a lot more, because eventually the outcome of education depends more on the quality of the teachers you have than on the curriculum and the syllabus and so on.
That is exactly true. And that is a point I've been trying to make earlier too, is that it is the quality of the teachers and the way that the teachers are trained that makes a huge difference to it. And the qualities that teachers have of humility, that you don't have to know everything. Even Google doesn't know everything. There are some things that, there are so many layers that you need to peel off. And to have that humility and say, I will look for the answer and I will find it for you if I'm not able to satisfy your curiosity, I think is really important. So, yes, I mean, the training of the teachers is also important. And again, define topper, right? I mean, to me, a topper is not somebody that gets 100 out of 100 in an exam. A topper is somebody who can actually question, has that scientific temperament. To me, that person is a topper. To me, that person is a topper that is extremely diligent, stays back after class and has these completely what seem like way out left field questions, but they're not really, because they're very much tied to the topic that I just finished teaching. Or finished work. They just finished working on in the classroom. An application of that. Those are my toppers. They're the people who are like trying to go look at and connect what they learn in the classroom to what is outside the classroom. Not the one that who's studying and getting the 100%.
Sure, I mean, we need the best of the qualities of both the head and the heart in the teacher, and to be able to get that type of teachers, teaching has to be an attractive profession.
Yes,
And
agree.
it's attractive not only because of can be attractive not only because of what teachers are paid, but also how they are treated and how much freedom they have in using their capacity to innovate and do the best uh, in terms of what will create the best possible citizens in general. And when it comes to science teaching, students who will be able to generate new knowledge, uh, you know,
And
uh, that,
research.
uh, so I think now we should move towards winding up things. Uh, Now, assessment, I think, again, is important because that is basically what drives how students learn. And I often talk in terms of having teaching which is not examination oriented, but instead having exams which are learning oriented.
Mhm.
So uh, that is something which we should move towards. And the deficiency in our assessment system has been realized by the system. And therefore, for a long time now, we have been having these questions which are called HAL, or higher ability learning questions.
Mhm.
But then what I've learned repeatedly from interactions with students is that we this system is being beaten, because there are guides available which give the higher ability learning questions which have been asked during the last several years. And if you remember the answers to those questions, the right answers to those questions, there are very good chances that the questions that you will get will be some of those questions. So questions are being repeated. At least the pattern is being repeated, and therefore the students are able to answer those questions, score 100% there too, even in higher ability learning questions. But what they are using to answer those questions correctly is not those higher abilities of learning, but once again, memory.
Mhm. Mhm. I know that it is, words can mean things, words cannot, sometimes words are not important. What you call higher ability learning, or higher ability learning questions. Is that what you call it? Higher.
Yes.
Um, a, we think of them here as higher order thinking, not higher ability learning. And just that twist in nomenclature, I think, can make a difference, because it is not that there's some students who are able and some students who are not, but that these are questions that are provoking a higher level of thinking in the student. Are they able to, again, I go back to those layers that I keep talking about, that are there in every subject, even in history and geography, which are not the focus of our conversation, but particularly in science. The students that I don't want to say participate, but that can succeed in that higher order thinking are those that can peel off those layers. Some of them can do it easily. Some of them need to be provoked to do it with further questioning. Okay, so then what is next? You've arrived at this answer, so what is next? So, some of them need that and some of them don't, but everybody has the ability to do that higher order thinking. And the more of that higher order thinking that they do, the more practice that they get. But to your point about the questions being a question bank and there are books being published, and then the students then memorizing that I think part of it has to do with the fact that there's a general understanding and consensus that students of one ability should be able to do this, and students of a different ability should be able to solve this kind of a problem, as opposed to students of, if you just want students to go with the basic knowledge, then here's a fact sheet, and they should be able to solve problems related to that fact sheet. But if you want higher order thinking, let us provoke that thinking by asking something that has them creatively think to that next level. Not next ability, but next level of thinking. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
No,
I'm trying.
perfectly. I mean, it does make a difference, the words that we use instead of higher ability learning, higher order thinking, does make a difference. But then what is important is the way it is implemented and the sincerity of intent, irrespective of the words used. That is very important.
But I think it is also more than the words, right? When you start using those words, then you're looking at students of one ability solving these problems and students of another ability solving a different. But when you're talking about let's provoke thinking, you're going to ask the questions in a different way. You're going to ask questions that can't be really replicated in a textbook that students can, or in a guidebook that students can then memorize.
That again leads us to sort of the quality of teachers we get, because the qualities of the head are also important. And without those, it's very difficult to create questions which test higher order thinking.
For
And
sure.
particularly if the question is an objective question. If you have to frame a multiple choice question, it's much easier to frame a question that tests factual recall than to frame a question that tests higher order thinking, and still be a multiple choice question. For example, one category of multiple choice questions is the assertion reason type of questions. They are the questions that test the higher order thinking. But then those are the questions which are most difficult to frame. And if you frame really good questions of that type and fill the question paper with that, much of the class will fail, because the way we teach and the assessment system need to be synchronized. They need to be in harmony. They need to go together. So
Right?
both the
Yes.
things go
Yes.
together. And for that, once again, we need the best of minds to turn to school teaching, make it more attractive. And the that is sort of the solution. And finally, I mean, at the end of it, uh, we have to create in the student a love for learning. And for that, learning should be fun. And learning can't be fun unless we bring in these innovative changes and apply our minds, and the best of minds take to school teaching. we are not actually doing it, because a few years back I had an opportunity to interview a large number of uh, people from the field of engineering, having masters and doctoral degrees, and they were they had applied for a job for joining the faculty of an engineering college. Now, I don't know engineering, I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't ask them technical questions. But one question which I asked a large number of them was that, have you read any book within the last 10 years which was not strictly required for passing an exam in any language on any subject? And the answer was a grand zero in most of the cases. So that much for the love for learning that we have been able to inculcate. And these are not just anyone, any person you meet in the street. These are people who are highly qualified and want to become teachers in an engineering college.
Right, right. No, I'm not. I agree with you. It is. There's a lot more to it. That passion that one can have for this field is necessary in order to be super successful. Otherwise, it is just another job. It is not a profession. It is, you're not professing something. It's just another job.
So the key is school education, and the key to better school education is better teachers and better teacher training.
Better teachers, better teacher training, a better form of assessment that would help the students take the leaps that they need to, particularly in the field of science. I had a student at the end of last year who said, "Help, help," and I said, "What happened?" And he walked into the class saying, "Help, help," and he said, "Everything I think about in terms of physics. It is so hard, Miss Nandakumar. Everything is." Like I have to say, I'm seeing physics everywhere now. And to me, that is success as a physics teacher, if I'm able to do that. Even in one student, I'm able to do that. So
I think it's we're already crossed the 1 hour limit, but if you have
I
the
would
time,
like to answer any questions because I
if you
know
have the
that
time, we'll still take up questions.
maybe another 10 minutes or
Sure.
so. But I don't see the person who asked the question. I don't see that person here. But if there's any other questions or any questions from the audience, there's
Arunima,
something in
any
the
questions in the chat?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was just about to decide that. So, the first question during the session, Amrita ji has mentioned, please explain the current educational system in Minnesota. And next, she writes, is there any board of education in India following experimental learning and assessment system?
So, Amritaji, I can answer the first part. I'm not sure I have any, information that would help with the second part. But the education system in Minnesota is education is a state topic here too, and every state has their standards. And Minnesota currently is reviewing their science standards, which means that a set of educators from around the state come and get together periodically and make a list of the things that every student that is graduating out of every class, all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade, needs to know in terms of science, just the topic of science. And they do this every 5 to 7 years. So every subject, they go by rotation. Every year it's a different subject. So there are these state standards that every school has to follow, every public school. Private schools, like or not unlike in India, are allowed to follow their own curriculum. But public schools have these standards that they have to follow. And then the high school diploma, which is awarded at the end of 12th grade, there is no common exam for all students like we have in India, the CBSE exam or whatever. There's a high school certificate that is awarded at the end of the year, and that certificate is given by the school because they have the license, so to speak, to give it, so long as the student has hit all those standards. So that is the way it works. And in my own school, I have a lot of flexibility in my own classroom. I should speak for my classroom, but I think I can speak for the teachers in my school, in that so long as we are attending to those standards at every grade, so in every subject, biology, physics, chemistry, and so forth, we are allowed a lot of flexibility given the budget that we are given. Every department has a budget to buy materials. Given that budget, we have a lot of flexibility on the how we reach those standards. The other very important part, I think, of education in the US is teaching in schools in the United States is very much a collaborative process. We have to collaborate with our colleagues. That is the way it is recognized that we can become better teachers. Not by attending coaching classes for teachers. We also have what is called professional development, which is a thing, but within the classroom, within the school building, on a day-to-day basis, we have been given paid time to collaborate. So I will collaborate with the other physics teachers. We meet once a week on Wednesday mornings before school, and we are paid for this to collaborate and discuss what's going well, what's not going well, how we can teach a particular topic. What are the most common misconceptions that students have about that topic? How can we address those misconceptions? What do we do about students that are lagging behind? What do we do for students that need differentiated instruction? All of that is done in what are called peer learning communities, PLCs. So PLCs are a very important part of teaching and learning in the United States, in Minnesota, and certainly in our school.
The question was also about the boards of examination in India, I think. Majority,
Yeah, go ahead.
majority of the students take the examinations under the CBSE, that is Central Board of Secondary Education. But there are a few other boards of examination. One of them is the International Board, and another is one which has been designed by Cambridge, IGCSE, and there's an Indian board, ICSE. So there are at least three other boards of examination under which the student can take the class 12 exam. And all these three are considered far more enlightened in their policies than the CBSE. But the schools which are affiliated to these boards of examination are extremely expensive. So the majority, in fact, ends up going to CBSE schools. So what we need is basically a change in CBSE.
Yeah. And then the last question I see is, after Mirambika, can you suggest any country or board which offers integral learning? I don't know. I mean, I am not sure of any country, because I think that is speaking to a very large population, even in the smallest of countries, or board. But what I can say is that there are communities. My own school, I would say, is a very progressive school. It may not be a free progress school in the true sense of the word, because we are a public school, which means we are a government school. We are very much tied to government standards. But I would say that within that framework, we are a very progressive school. We offer language learning in our classes, which is way beyond what a general public school in the United States would. For example, between kindergarten and 8th grade, you can go either to English medium, so to speak, if I use the Indian context, or you could go to Chinese medium or Spanish medium. There are three mediums offered between kindergarten and 8th grade. You as a member of this community have a choice, and you could go to any one of those three. That's just one of the many that my school district offers. We have a well-funded college-level research lab that does scientific research at the high school level that many of my students actually take. It's a course. Science research is actually a course in my classroom. So yes, I mean, I think there are pockets everywhere. Some of that has to do with having a visionary principal or a visionary administrator. Around the world, there are many. Any
Uh,
other questions? I thought somebody else had
yeah,
raised their hand.
we have another participant who has raised the hand. Please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and speak up.
Unmute.
நீ unmute பண்ணு.
பேசுங்க.
Hello, I am Nandakumar from India. I find that your topic of discussion has not included capability of the teacher to motivate the students to improve themselves. First of all, the teachers have to motivate themselves and learn more. Then only they can teach more to the students. How do you solve that problem?
I think that's a good question, and I think I kind of touched on it way towards the end, where I said collaboration is such an important part because and collaboration requires humility too. Teaching is a really humbling profession. Um, it's one, you need to be humble enough to be able to learn from your peers, and not think, oh, I'm the best teacher in the school, so the way I do it is the right way to do it. But to be able to have that humility and to be able to collaborate with other teachers is important. And I think that is what will um, motivate a teacher to motivate their students. I think, if you get what I'm saying. So collaboration is one way to go. But again, teachers, the administration has to support collaboration. If the administration is giving, more importance to say, you have to have so many tests done, and you have to grade them, and you have to mark them, and then you have to give them back, then that becomes a priority. Or that your students do not have enough that are getting 99% on the CBSE board exam, then that becomes the goal. Not are the teachers learning, and are the teachers learning to teach? I have some peers that are world famous teachers. I'm very lucky to work with them. World famous educators, actually. And so I have no problem learning from them, and they in turn have no problem sharing their insight. I am very generous with sharing my experiences of teaching around for all these years with teachers that are younger. So there's that collaboration piece that is super important.
No, out of all those things, my question is, how do you assess the teacher for their self-motivation to read more about the subjects of teaching profession, of their profession, so that they can teach the children better? Have you got any assessment method of assessing the teachers, what they have learned during the past 1 year?
Yeah, I think Dr. Bijlani talked about that. It's a sad state of affairs. If engineers or teachers who are going into the teaching profession have not read anything in the past 1 year that is outside of their exam taking or their qualification taking situation, I think we have a problem. And I think that is a societal problem. It doesn't seem to be a specific problem. Any other questions?
Obviously, I mean, learning is not seen as fun, it's seen as a
Yes.
burden to be carried for the sake of
Yes.
passing exams.
So is teaching.
So it's
And when
teaching.
that is the case, then that's when the issues are. When teaching is a burden, learning is a burden, they're all burdens.
And that's why teaching is not a popular profession.
Correct. Yeah, unfortunately. I do see another question about Finnish education system, and I'm afraid I maybe Dr. Bijlani can enlighten us, but I'm afraid I don't have. I also have a hard stop in another 4 minutes, so just letting you know.
No, actually, I also know nothing about the Finnish system, although I've heard that it has some very good features.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, there are pockets around the world where it is happening. Luckily for us now, we have the internet, and we can actually see what is happening around the world and experience what is happening around the world just by the screen in front of us. just through the screen in front of us, I should say.
Thank you so much, Bhuvana ma'am. Thanks a lot, Dr. Bijlani sir, for this insightful and thought-provoking conversation session. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time for all of us. Before closing, I would just quickly share that the recording of today's session and all the Yes Talks are published on our YouTube channel, Yes Spirituality. Please do visit this channel for extensive content on yoga, education, spirituality, and related subjects like psychology and wellness. Participants, we thank you as well for being with us today. We'll close today's session now with a moment of peaceful silence. Namaste.
Thank you.